From the opening pages of Scripture, giants have stood as symbols of rebellion, intimidation, and corruption. The Nephilim of Genesis 6 filled the earth with violence before the flood. The Anakim terrified Israel's spies in Canaan. Goliath mocked the armies of the living God until David struck him down. Each appearance of giants in biblical history carried the same message. Satan was attempting to block the seed line, to stop the promise of Christ from coming forth. Yet every giant fell, because God's covenant cannot be broken. Jesus warned that the last days would mirror the days of Noah. In that generation, corruption reached into the very DNA of humanity, producing unnatural offspring that defied God's order. Today, with genetic engineering, transhumanism, and the rise of global rebellion, we see shadows of that ancient corruption returning. Giants may not only be a relic of the past, they may be a prophetic reality of the future. At Armageddon, Scripture describes the gathering of the world's armies in defiance against the Lamb. Whether through engineered strength, demonic empowerment, or literal giant resurgence, Satan's forces will rise to intimidate and oppose. Mere men would not have the courage to stand against God, but empowered by deception, these giants will. Yet the message remains unchanged. Every giant is doomed. Just as David's stone shattered Goliath, Christ's return will crush the serpent's head once and for all. Giants may come soon, but they are only a temporary spectacle before eternal defeat. Their rise is not a cause for fear, but a reminder that prophecy is unfolding and the King of Kings is near. Satan's giants may defy God, but they cannot withstand him. The greatest battle is coming, and the victory is already secured. Genesis 3 verse 15, the first prophecy. God says to the serpent, "I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." This is the foundational prophecy of Christ's victory over Satan. It sets up a cosmic conflict, two lineages, two destinies. The Nephilim, Genesis 6 verse 4, are often interpreted as a corruption of humanity, either through fallen angels or rebellious men. If they were born of rebellion, they can be seen as part of the serpent's seed, a distorted lineage opposing God's plan. Their role before the flood echoes this enmity. They filled the earth with violence, pushing humanity toward destruction. Post-flood giants, Anakim, Rephaim, Goliath. These giants stood as enemies of Israel, opposing the covenant people. In that sense, they embodied the serpent's seed, hostile forces resisting the advance of God's promise through Abraham's line. Goliath, for example, directly opposed David, the ancestor of Christ. His defeat foreshadows the Messiah crushing the serpent's head. Giants represent more than physical stature. They symbolize intimidating powers aligned against God's people. Whether literal descendants of corrupted unions or simply human enemies, they manifest the hostility of the serpent's seed. The woman's seed, ultimately Christ, triumphs over them, showing that God's covenant prevails. Satan's strategy against the seed. 1. Genesis 3 verse 15, the seed promise. God declared that the woman's seed would crush the serpent's head. From that moment, Satan knew a deliverer was coming through human lineage. His schemes often target that line, trying to corrupt, destroy, or divert it. Giants before the flood, Nephilim. Genesis 6 describes the Nephilim as a product of corruption. Many interpreters believe Satan used fallen angels or rebellious unions to pollute humanity's bloodline. If successful, this would prevent a pure seed from coming forth. But God preserved Noah's family, keeping the line intact. Giants after the flood, Anakim, Rephaim, Goliath. These giants reappear in Canaan, standing as obstacles to Israel's inheritance. Israel's covenant line had to pass through the land to reach the promise. Giants became physical embodiments of resistance, enemies of Abraham's seed, and ultimately of Christ's lineage. David versus Goliath, a prophetic clash. David, ancestor of Jesus, faced Goliath, a giant who mocked God's people. This wasn't just a battle of size, it was a symbolic showdown between the serpent's seed and the woman's seed. David's victory foreshadowed Christ's ultimate triumph over Satan. Claims of giant bones. Over the years, stories have circulated about giant skeletons being discovered, sometimes in newspapers from the 1800s, sometimes in modern fringe reports. These accounts often describe bones far larger than normal human remains, supposedly confirming biblical giants like the Nephilim or Anakim. However, mainstream archaeology and museums, like the Smithsonian, have consistently stated that no verified giant human skeletons exist. Many of the old reports are believed to be hoaxes, misidentified fossils, or exaggerations. Why people believe evidence is suppressed. 1. Scientific paradigm. Modern science operates within evolutionary frameworks. Evidence of giants would challenge accepted views of human history. Some argue that institutions suppress such finds to avoid rewriting history. Institutional control. The Smithsonian Institution is often accused in conspiracy theories of hiding giant bones. These claims usually lack hard evidence, but they persist because of distrust in large institutions. Biblical narrative conflict. If giant bones were confirmed, it would strongly support biblical accounts. A critic suggests that secular academia resists evidence that validates Scripture. Josephus on giants and their bones. 1. Josephus writings. In Antiquities of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 2, Josephus mentions that the bones of giants were still visible in his time. He describes them as so large that no one who has seen them would believe that they were human. He ties these remains to the biblical accounts of the Anakim and other giants Israel encountered in Canaan. Public display. Josephus records that giant bones were exhibited in certain places, and people could view them. This suggests that in the first century, there was a cultural memory and even physical evidence tied to the biblical narrative. Other ancient writers, Greek and Roman, also mention enormous bones being unearthed and displayed, often interpreted as heroes or monsters. Interpretation. Ancient audiences saw these bones as confirmation of biblical and mythological giants. Modern scholars often argue they were misidentified fossils like mammoth or mastodon bones. But Josephus clearly believed they were the remains of the giants described in Scripture.